Guys, what's going on in here?
These stairs don't seem very safe.
We could have just done this the whole time.
Shut it off.
Okay.
Yeah.
I lay weeping in bed, trying my best to keep my sobs at an absolute minimum, lest I wake up my father to suffer another beating. Only moments prior, I had been scratched badly by the satanic spawn that we called a cat. Not to give anyone the wrong idea. Even at the age of 4, I loved animals, but that creature was something else entirely, scooped out from my deceased uncle's apartment, feral and full of hatred. At the smallest provocation, it would dig its claws into our skin, which was of course the reason why my father forced it to sleep in my room. Afraid that my blood would stain the sheets, I snuck down into the kitchen to wash myself off as quietly as I could. I shivered as I passed the basement door, hearing the familiar groans emerging from the depths. My mother had blamed the sounds on the wind, but without any windows or even a faint draft pulling through, something about it was clearly wrong. The cat rushed past my legs, hissing as it rushed under the sofa. I hated that creature and the connection to my father it represented. Ignoring it, I proceeded into the kitchen. I turned the tap just enough for a few drops of water to pour out onto my dripping wound. It burned as I cleaned it, but I couldn't even let out a mild yelp in pain. I couldn't risk waking my parents up. I carefully tore a piece of paper towel from its roll, checking behind me in fear. And then I heard a sound emerging from the entrance, sending a wave of panic down my spine as I worried that I might have woken my parents up despite my best efforts. But the fear was immediately replaced by relief, as I realized it was just the basement door creaking open. With a slightly damaged frame, it tended to slide open at random points throughout the day and night. Small taps echoed through the living room as I heard our cat rush down into the basement. The last time it had been let in there, it somehow broke its leg on the way down. Another event where fault was placed in my hands. If my father somehow figured out that I had let him down there again, he would know that I had let it out at night, which meant that I would pay for it in the morning. So, as much as I hated the creature, I had to venture down into the basement and retrieve him before he managed to hurt himself. I hid the paper towel in my pajama pant pocket, leaving no trace behind as I followed the little beast down into the basement. As I reached the door that stood ajar, I could hear him hissing from the bottom of the staircase. A part of me worried that he might scratch or even bite me again, but I would rather suffer 1,000 cuts from his claws than another beating from my so-called guardian. I proceeded, taking single, slow steps down the creaky staircase. The cat had fallen silent, but a new sound had taken its place. A bizarre, squishing sound, akin to meat being pushed through an old hand-driven grinder, coupled with heavy breathing. Still, I continued, too worried about the consequences if I refused. Cracking sounds followed, crunch after crunch echoing up the stairs, and then stepping on a rotten piece of wood, the step broke, sending me pummeling down the rest of the stairs, where I roughly landed on the concrete floor below. And by then, I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. In a mixture of pain and fear, I started to sob, crying loudly in the darkness, alone in the night. My only solace was that the sounds in the basement might not be making up to the bedroom where my parents slept. Maybe I would even be allowed to weep in peace, but reality begged to differ, as a presence in the darkness had awoken. "Why do you cry, child?" a deep, raspy voice asked. I turned around, trying to figure out where the sound had come from. It hadn't been either of my parents, I knew that much, yet it felt oddly familiar. "Here," it let out in a mere whisper. The sound had come from a wall in the darkest corners of the basement, one just barely touched by the faint moonlight daring to shine in from the living room above. Only then did the metallic stench and scent of rotten meat hit my nostrils, causing me to recoil in disgust. On the floor lay a pool of fresh blood, shining gently in the dimmest of lights. It had come from our cat, I could gather that much, but the rest of his body was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Smokey?" I asked with a trembling voice. "You cared for the small creature?" the voice asked, seemingly curious. "No, I hate him," I let out in protest, almost angered by the mere sentiment. "Then why do you want to find it? I have witnessed the pain it has caused you. I have heard your cries." "He belongs to my dad," I explained. "He'll be angry at me." "I apologize," the voice said. "I require sustenance." Though young, I was well familiar with the concept of death, and with a pool of blood before me, and its stench following, I realized there was no turning back. I started crying again, knowing how badly I had messed up. "What am I going to do?" I sobbed to no response. "Who even are you?" "Who I am," it repeated. "I do not know." The peculiar statement somehow set a stop to my whines. It was such an odd concept in my young mind that a sentient being able to talk didn't have an identity that it was aware of. "You don't know?" I asked. "No. Who are you?" it asked in return. "I'm Helena," I introduced myself. "Why don't you have a name?" "I was never granted a name." "Why not?" "No person has ever acknowledged my presence. I have been alone for millennia." My childhood mind was easily distracted. Presented with such a unique, bizarre situation, I could refocus my mind away from the horrors that would undoubtedly await me in the morning. "How about I name you then?" I asked, starting to feel almost comforted by the being's unexplained presence. "What name will you bestow upon me?" I let out as I mulled over the best name a 4-year-old could conjure. "How about Leo?" I suggested, stealing the name from one of my favorite cartoons. "Yes, Leo will suffice," the voice said. And that night, an extraordinarily bizarre friendship began. Living far out in the countryside with close to no other kids my age, I really hadn't grown up with anybody other than the occasional stray animal wandering onto our land. So having somebody that I could talk to without being fearful made me feel the first ounce of happiness that I had experienced during my albeit short stay on Earth. Oddly enough, when providing an excuse to my parents that our cat had escaped through a window at night, I wasn't punished all too severely. In fact, they both seemed relieved that the monster had vanished from our house, and the traces of blood tainting the basement had all but vanished as night faded in the morning light. Following that event, I took it upon myself to feed Leo. I would usually go down into the basement at night and spend a few hours after dark talking to Leo. I fed him whatever scraps of meat we had left behind in the fridge, which he appreciated as he told me stories of a world that I hadn't the faintest chance of comprehending. I quickly learned that only flesh could sustain him. He explained to me that the fresher the meat was, the better, but to get a hold of the food I had to be sneaky. Usually I would await my father's return from work. He would always stop by the barn for a few drinks and would end up getting quite drunk. I could smell the alcohol reeking off of him as he stumbled into the living room, only to pass out onto the couch. Once I could hear him snoring, I would sneak into the kitchen, put some crumbs on a plate which I placed next to him on the sofa, and feed the rest to the kind beast in the basement. Doing that, my father would usually wake up in a drunken slumber in the middle of the night, thinking that he had mindlessly consumed it before passing out. For 3 years, this strategy worked. My father still remained the scum of the earth that he had always been, but he remained none the wiser about the fact that I had a friend living within our basement walls. Over the years, he had even begun to grow. His voice had gotten more prominent. Even a mouth had formed in the walls, one filled with jagged and rotting teeth. Every day that I would feed him, a task growing progressively more difficult as he grew larger. Inevitably, the food stolen from our fridge would be too much. Just before my 9th birthday, Leo had asked for a larger meal. I stole the majority of a leftover rotisserie chicken, but as I stumbled back to the basement, the snores emerging from my father's mouth abruptly stopped. "What are you doing, you little piece of crap?" he asked, angry at me before he even realized what was going on. But then he saw the chicken, obviously thinking that I was about to steal it for myself. "What the heck do you think you're doing?" I wasn't," I stuttered. What followed was the same cascade of drunkenness that I knew all too well, followed by a few slaps to the face, leaving behind red marks and a black eye. I took it all knowing there was nothing I could say to justify my actions, knowing that I was too weak to defend myself, and knowing my mother feared the man just as much as I did. I was alone and left with no one in the world to protect me. No one except for Leo. "Why are you crying?" Leo asked as I greeted him that night. "What happened?" My dad," I began, unable to continue between sobs. "I couldn't get you the food, I'm sorry." "Let me punish him," Leo said, a suggestion that I had heard before but one that I had rejected on several occasions. "I can't," I repeated. "Why would you defend a man who has caused you nothing but suffering since the day you emerged into this world?" Leo asked, almost sounding disappointed. For a moment, I wondered what our lives would be like without him. If my mom and I could finally find some semblance of peace without that monster looming above us. Maybe I had just finally reached my breaking point. Or maybe I was starting to lose empathy as I aged. Whatever the case, on that day, I finally agreed to let the wall in our basement take care of our greatest problem. "How?" I asked. With that, we formed a simple yet effective plan. But making my father into the basement itself remained our biggest hurdle. It had been moldy and wet for decades and had even been left empty since before I was born. My dad had no reason to descend these stairs unless I tricked him, that was. In addition, I had to do it on a day that my mother wasn't home. Months would pass before the opportunity arose, but when it did, I quickly set the plan into action. As usual, my father returned late at night from the bar and I patiently waited for him to pass out in a drunken stupor. Once he was fast asleep, I took the few toys that I had, strewn them across the living room floor with a trail leading down into the basement. I could have just hidden down there loudly announcing my presence, but though I knew what had to be done, I wasn't brave enough to witness the act itself. All I needed was for the man himself to think I was down there. Sure enough, as soon as he awoke, still slightly drunk, he noticed the mess on the floor. Calling my name to receive no response, he walked along the trail, kicking and breaking the toys as he passed. All the while, he demanded I show myself. What he didn't realize was that I was hiding in the untouched guest room, peeking out through a crack in the door. I stared out in anticipation, only to notice my father hesitate as he reached the top of the basement stairs. "Melina," he said with a slightly softer voice. "Just come up, I'm not mad at you. I just want to talk." He almost spoke with care, too afraid to venture down into the basement, as if he too knew that something beyond his comprehension lurked down there, a being that just didn't belong to our world. "Come on, I'm waiting," he went on. In response, a quiet laugh emerged from the basement. While it wasn't mine, it didn't sound like Leo's either, as if he had attempted to mimic me. In fact, I wasn't sure that I had ever heard my friend laugh before, nor did I know that he was capable of humor. But still, the laugh sent my father back into a blind rage. Screaming my name, promising another beating, he went charging into the basement. In the clear, I rushed out from my hiding spot and jammed a chair under the door handle. He was trapped. There was no way out. "What the heck?" my father began, but his voice quickly turned to blood-curdling screams as the wall got to work on him. His bones cracked and his flesh was torn to shreds as the man screamed in absolute agony. I covered my ears, almost daring to regret an act that I could never undo. Though I held no love for the man, it pained me to hear him helplessly beg for his life. But as soon as the yells had begun, they turned to incomprehensible gurgles as blood filled his lungs. Before long, silence once again filled the empty house and a sense of uneasy peace filled my soul. "Dad?" I called out, checking if I would get a response. "Leo?" I went on, but still nothing. Afraid of the sight that would meet me in the basement, I remained upstairs, sitting in front of the door, half expecting something terrible to emerge from the dark. Hours passed by and my mother eventually returned home from another night shift, finding me on the couch as pale as a sheet. "Where's your father?" she asked, too tired to notice the rough state that I was in. "I don't know," I responded meekly, sure that she would figure out what I had done. But all I got in return was an unenthusiastic, "Huh," before she went to sleep. Even when her husband failed to show himself in the morning, she didn't seem to care all that much, as if his absence didn't bother her. While it wasn't unusual for him to stay out drinking until the middle of the night, he almost always showed himself in the early morning hours. A couple of days turned into a week and my father still hadn't showed up. Though suspicious at first, my mom started to appear more at ease, almost daring to smile. It wasn't until the second week before we finally decided to inform the police, not because we missed him, but because it would seem suspicious if we didn't. It wasn't the first time they had been to our house, seeing how the man treated us and all, but as soon as they appeared, he would be a model citizen, and he would always find a way to make Mom forgive him. Without charges to press, we were left to suffer alone. No proper investigation was ever launched. It was simply assumed that the man had abandoned us, a situation that suited us well. During the next few years, my mom and I would finally get a chance to bond, and my life started improving. Bit by bit, the memory of a nightmarish childhood began to fade. Of course, Leo remained my secret friend up through my formative teenage years, but with his appetite ever growing, feeding him had become somewhat of a problem. Where scraps and raw meat had once sufficed, he now wanted fresh kills. I resorted to getting a part-time job at a local butcher, sneaking out what little that I could, and using the rest of my salary to buy gamed meat from hunters and farms. For a short while, the meat sufficed. It could sustain the growing being in our basement. For every day that passed, more and more distinctive features formed. Arms, fingers, claws. Leo kept getting bigger, almost taking up the entirety of the basement wall. And as time passed, it became abundantly clear that my efforts alone wouldn't be enough to satiate his ever-growing hunger forever. "I require sustenance," he begged. "I just fed you," I argued back. "More," he almost yelled, his voice echoing through the basement. By that time, eyes had formed alongside the mouth, and spikes emerged around the wall, forming a primitive facial structure. "What do you want then? I don't really have any money left." "I long for the taste of living flesh," he said. "Pink, warm skin, trembling muscles, soft fat." "You're talking about?" I began, not daring to finish the sentence. Humans, he went on, finishing the thought for me. I can't, I'm not a murderer. Hearing my mother parking her car outside, I ended the argument there and I rushed upstairs. Leo had been my guardian for all these years, saving me from my father. But I wasn't about to murder anybody for his sake. Not again. For the next few days, I would toss the meat down into the basement without talking to him, upset with his evolving desires. I started spending more time in my room, far enough away not to hear his soft whispers. But ignoring the creature would not be an option, as one day while chatting with a friend on the phone, I heard a voice calling for me from downstairs. Helena, my mom called. I ran down to check on what she needed, and I was met by a puzzled expression on her face. What is it? I asked. Oh, nothing, she said. I just thought that I heard you calling from the basement. Did you want to speak to me or something? Knowing that I hadn't said anything, it didn't take me long to realize who exactly had called her name from the basement. But not willing to tell her the truth, my thoughts raced to come up with a suitable excuse. I was just talking on the phone. You must have misheard me. I lied poorly, but she believed me, having no reason to mistrust me on such a pointless lie. That night, I waited for my mother to fall asleep before I ventured back down into the depths of the basement. My heart was filled with a mixture of fear and anger. The creature that I had once named a friend had attempted to eat my mother. You return, Leo said softly, almost surprised at my presence. You tried to kill my mother, I said, jumping straight to the point. I must consume flesh, he said, sounding almost weak, his words quieter than usual. I am famished. I've been feeding you the same things as I always have been ever since we met. It no longer satiates me. I require unspoiled flesh. I require living meat. No, I said firmly. I'm not doing this anymore. You would allow me to perish. I will keep feeding you animal meat, but I'm not going to kill anyone for your cravings, and I can't forgive you for trying to kill my mother. Leo didn't respond, seeming to contemplate my harsh words. I had already decided to end our friendship, but I wasn't ready to let him die. So I would keep tossing down freshly hunted game purchased from local farmers and hunters without entering the basement. That way I could avoid engaging in any sort of conversation with the beast. Only then could I live with a semi-clean conscience. For months and years I fed the beast, never speaking a single word. During the nights I could hear him groan and beg for flesh, but I refused to listen. It was a miracle that my mother never caught on, but in her advancing years, her hearing had started to fade, and her mind with it. Though she had barely entered her 50s, the years of alcohol to deal with the trauma caused by my father, they had worn on her soul, and though I tried to get her help, she never truly recovered. And then one day as I returned home from work in the evening, my mother was no longer there to greet me. I found her body in her bed and she had passed away while taking a nap. There she lay looking as if she were just sleeping, but entirely different. Lighter, tired, absent. I did what I could in a futile attempt at resuscitation, but her body had already gone cold. There was nothing left to be done. It was determined during the autopsy that she had passed peacefully in her sleep. Her heart had grown tired and simply ceased to beat. I could take comfort in the fact that she never saw it coming, and that she at least experienced a handful of semi-happy years before leaving this world. But with her gone, I was truly alone. Another year passed and I remained alone in an inherited house that I knew wasn't truly empty. Once I entered college, I even started dating, meeting a guy, Martin, who seemed to tick all the boxes. Time passed, and though the memories lingered, they appeared as painless scars, serving as little more than reminders of old wounds sustained. For a while, we were happy. He had just finished college by the time that I entered my freshman year. I was 19 and he was 24. He was a private man who moved here from a couple of states over, finding work at a local bar. He never talked about his past, nor why he had left everything he knew behind, which should have been the first sign of things to come, had I only been that wise. Growing up, seeing my mother get hit by my father, I always judged her for choosing a man who could hurt her like that. Though I felt guilty, I couldn't help but pity her for staying. I never thought in a million years that I would be stupid enough to fall into a similar trap. Oh, how naive I was. As it turns out, mistakes can cross the boundaries of generations and can be repeated no matter how careful you think you are. Martin first hit me during what felt like an innocuous argument. He didn't even seem that angry, so I never saw it coming. Too in shock, I couldn't even respond. A man that I thought I could spend the rest of my life with had just put his hands on me, but I was in too deep to just leave. It started with outbursts like these, followed by profuse apologies and love bombing. Then the cycle would repeat. Step by step, my freedom was taken from me. I couldn't dress the way that I wanted. I couldn't spend time alone with the few friends that I had. At some point, I wasn't even allowed to leave the house without supervision. It happened so fast that I almost suffered whiplash. But before I knew it, he had taken full control over my life. The man who had entered my house might as well have been a reincarnation of the man that I called father. No sooner had that realization hit me than I decided that I wasn't going to take this lying down. I started to form a plan of escape. I still had some money from my inheritance left. Not enough for a luxurious lifestyle by any means, but enough to leave town and never look back. Martin could have the house for all that I cared. A place haunted by decades of pain, cursed beyond the ability to be cleansed. I just needed to find the perfect time for my escape. I chose the date and waited for Martin to leave for work, and I started packing my bags without hesitation. He never returned home early since he didn't have a flexible work schedule, nor did he call in sick, enjoying the attention that he got from drunk girls at the bar. If only they knew the monster that he truly was. But as I tore down the shelves in a frantic attempt at making a swift escape, something caught my eye, a reflection bouncing off a small glass surface. A camera hidden among my personal effects in my bedroom, pointing directly at my bed where my bags lay half-packed. Without having to ask, I knew that Martin had been watching me from afar, which meant that he would be back home any minute. I decided to drop the rest and leave with whatever I had already packed. But as I ran for the door, Martin entered with a knowing and furious expression plastered right across his face. "You think you can just leave?" he yelled as he pulled the bags from my hands. I tried to push him away, and though I was no weakling by any means, he was far larger. I didn't stand a chance. "How do you not understand this?" he said as he grabbed my arm and started pulling me back into the house. "You belong to me." I continued to fight back to the best of my ability, twisting around, punching him, all to no avail. Then with one final push, he pulled my shoulder joint straight out of its socket. "Let me go," I half demanded, half begged between screams of agony. Then, not sure where to put me, he opted for the room closest to our struggle, the one most easily locked up. The basement, a room that I knew lay barren, but one that had never been empty. He ripped open the door and pushed me inside, letting me roll down the stairs towards the bottom, where I remained on the floor, battered, bruised, and with a dislocated shoulder. "I didn't want to hurt you, but you really left me no choice," he said before closing and locking the door behind him. I was trapped. Lying on the floor, I just cried, like I had so many years prior the first time that I met Leo at the ripe old age of 4. And just like then, the beast answered, ready to hear my pleas for help. "Why do you cry, child?" the voice called out, weaker than I had ever heard it before. "I'm not a child anymore," I responded, "and still nothing has changed." "But you are still so little. I can help you," Leo went on, a suggestion that I was all too familiar with. "Not this time," I replied. "I can't keep fighting anymore, just let it be over." "No," Leo exclaimed much louder than before. "It is not your time. You must continue your journey." "Why?" I asked. "What's the point?" "Your purpose is yet to be revealed." "What do you mean?" "Keep fighting." "I can't." "You will." "I'm too weak to fight him." "You are not alone." "Why would you help me after I abandoned you?" My voice trailed off. Before Leo could respond, the door shot open, and Martin stumbled in, a gun in his hand, one that I didn't even know that he owned. "I hate that it had to come to this," he began as he walked down the stairs. "But I can't exactly keep you down here forever. This'll be easier on the both of us." With one arm refusing to cooperate, I pushed myself up and crawled towards the basement wall, knowing fully well that I had no chance of outrunning a bullet. But Martin would want to make it personal. He wouldn't attack from a distance. Sure enough, he descended all the way down the stairs, walked up to me with an empty look in his eyes. He didn't attempt to further explain himself, nor did he offer a chance for reconciliation. In his mind, I had betrayed him, and that was all that it took. He lifted the gun, pointing it directly at my head, as if preparing to take out a rabid dog. I could only close my eyes and wait for him to pull the trigger, but such mercy would never come. Instead, the silent atmosphere was shattered by Martin's blood-curdling screams as his flesh was being torn from bone. I could feel his blood splatter across my face, but that time for once, I decided not to hide from an act that I had partially been responsible for. Though his demise was the consequence of his own actions, I felt like I deserved some credit. I opened my eyes and saw for the first time how the creature in the wall consumed its prey. Dozens of arm-like appendages extended from the wall, tearing into him with long claws that tore through his skin, his fat muscle as if they were butter. All he could do was scream until his chest was torn open, and blood started to fill his lungs. What little remaining of his rapidly expiring body was incorporated into the wall, consumed by my guardian. And then the world fell silent once more and I was saved. "You are safe," Leo said, softly breaking the silence. "I know," was all that I could respond. "Thank you. Thank you for always being there when I need you." "Our bond will never break, and because of you, I am at last satiated. But this does not mark the end of our coexistence. This is just the beginning." "What do you mean?" I asked. Later, little one. Now I must rest. And with that, Leo fell asleep. A rest I granted him as I attempted to process all the horrors that I had experienced since my childhood to this day. That day, I decided that I would grant my savior whatever he desired, be it the flesh from living people or revenge on his enemies. I would let no innocent person suffer, nor would I choose at random. I would actively seek out those deserving of a gruesome death and lure them to my house, where Leo could feast. I knew that it would be no easy task, but I would do it for him. Throughout my entire miserable life, he had been my one constant, the only presence that had accompanied me. I would do whatever it took. But as I descended the basement on the following day to let Leo in on my plan to serve him, I was met with an empty wall. Where Leo had once lived was a large indent in the basement's foundation, as if he had just upped and left. A sadness emerged in my chest, as though the creature had abandoned me. But just the previous day, he had promised that we were interconnected. It couldn't be a lie. Yet as the weeks passed, the basement remained silent. Even as I tossed down whatever meat I had in the fridge, it just lay on the floor to rot. Leo, whatever he had been, was truly gone from my life. And then reports of missing people started showing up on the news, mostly vagrants or criminals on the run from the police, people that wouldn't quickly be missed, but in a large enough number that people started to notice. They would just vanish with no trace. No bodies were ever found, nor did they show up in any other cities or even states. Week by week, the reports kept getting more frequent, and I knew exactly who was responsible. Leo's hunger had kept growing even after he had emerged from my basement, a lust for flesh that could not be truly satiated. Though the people didn't necessarily deserve to be consumed, I knew there was nothing in this world that could stop him. But even if I could, I had sworn my loyalty to him. It was a thought that followed me even as I slept in my bed at night. I wondered how far he would go before he had finally consumed enough, and if the people killed actually deserved it, or if they were innocents found at the wrong place at the wrong time. Just as I lingered between the world of the waking people and the realms of sleep, a voice snatched me back to attention, one all too familiar. "Hello, little one." Leo spoke softly through the dark, closer than I had ever heard him. Shooting up in bed, I saw a dark silhouette standing in the dark, 9 feet tall, hunched over to prevent his head from hitting the ceiling. Several arms stretched from his torso, ending in razor-sharp claws, and the stench of rotten flesh emanated with his raspy breath. "Leo?" I asked. "Yes," he responded. "I have come for you. It is time." "Time for what?" "Time to fulfill your purpose beyond this realm," he said. "What purpose?" I stuttered. "This world no longer belongs within the reach of mankind's filthy grasp, but you are different. Come with us, and I promise you safe passage to the realm of Irkella. No one will ever hurt you again." "What about the people living here?" "You no longer need concern yourself with their well-being, but you must come with us now." I just stared speechlessly at the creature who had grown up calling Leo, only to now realize that he was something else entirely, spawned from a world that I had no concept of, one focused only on conquering the world that I had grown up in. But as he patiently awaited a reply, I thought back to all the pain and suffering that I had endured, the false kindness that I had been given, only to face years of abuse. If this was the world that I had, I wasn't sure it was the one that I wished to protect. "What do you say, little one?" And with that, my purpose became clear. The entirety of my span in this realm, the lessons that it had taught me, the people that I had to endure, I knew exactly what I had to do.